Hi guys, and welcome to episode 19 of the From the Vault podcast. I am your host, Nathaniel Forsyth, and with me this week is friend of the podcast and Scottish National Magic the Gathering champion, Holt Hauser.
That's me. How's it going?
So, we've been away for a few weeks. Both me and the normal host, Dan, have been super busy over the month of August, and we've just had no time to record a podcast, but we're back now, aiming to be back on track for a weekly release schedule again.
I feel like it's pretty much impossible to keep any commitments during the festival.
Yeah.
For those of our listeners who aren't familiar with the Edinburgh Fringe or International Festival, basically through August, the city kind of just explodes and becomes full of nonsense. There's like shows at every bar and at every corner, and there's tons of tourists, and you can't get anywhere, and I hate it.
See, I don't hate it. I hate the Mile because the Mile being a big like thoroughfare in the city, and it gets totally taken over by street performers and flyers and tourists. And normally I would go up and down it to get to places I want to go, but you don't really do that during the festival unless you want to be really late.
I think the thing that bothers me the most is just like my commute time doubles. Like, it's really cool having a thing because there's like tons of shows, comedy, theater, art of all sorts. It's really awesome, actually. It's just I've been here enough years where I'm like, okay, this is more of an inconvenience than it is an opportunity.
I mean, that's kind of true. You also have to bear in mind that the festival basically funds the city.
Yeah, that's fair.
Because so many tourists come that like every cafe, every restaurant, every hotel, so many small businesses get to exist basically because of it.
For sure. But
yeah, as a result, both me and Dan were super busy. Friends coming up, like additional work and stuff like that. Just very busy over the month of August. But that is over now. All of the tourists have gone home, and we both should be a lot less busy going forward and a lot more able to deliver podcasts on schedule. So, there's been a lot of stuff in Magic recently, but this episode is actually going to be focused on the stuff that is upcoming in Magic. Sort of. We're going to be talking about Ravnica in preparation for Guilds of Ravnica.
Ooh.
And we're going to be looking back at the last two times we visited Ravnica, and the sort of stuff that went on then, like the successes and the failures of those two blocks, and what we think that means going forward. So, as of time of recording, we are recording this Thursday afternoon, UK time. A stream is going to go up at 2 p.m. Pacific today that will tell us some more information about the new set, including all the guild mechanics. So by the time this episode gets released, everyone will be able to check our work.
And see how awesome we are, because we'll nail everything.
Yeah.
We are basically R&D today.
Yeah.
And, of course, all of our predictions will be 100% spot on.
Absolutely, definitely. That's definitely true. I know that I'm pretty confident in some predictions, but they're mostly what won't happen. Yeah. Predicting what will happen is a lot harder.
That's fair.
But, with all that in mind, let's jump in. I wanted to start by looking at the very first set, because obviously that set went through a bit of a weird road to development. There's a really good article that Mark Rosewater wrote about how the original Ravnica set came about, and that it was a concept of how do we make a multicolored set with a new kind of twist, because they'd done play as many colors as you possibly could, which was
wasn't it Planar Chaos or one of them had
Plane Chase.
Plane Chase.
No, that's a different thing. Planar Chaos was the Future Sight set. It was Plane Shift. It was Invasion.
I always get the two confused.
Plane Shift Apocalypse. Invasion block was all about play tons of colors. Invasion was about.
Was that where Domain was first printed?
No, that was Alara.
Oh right, okay. Another multicolored set.
Yeah, maybe it did have Domain, but I don't think it had Domain. But either way, that set was all about playing as many colors as possible and doing a bunch of stuff. And pushing your mana base to its limits. And they kind of they wanted to do another multicolor set, but they weren't sure, how do you do it that's more exciting and captures people in a way that isn't, crazy play all the colors. So eventually, I won't go through the whole article, but basically they got to this point where they were like, what if we were trying to get you to play 2 colors? Like, specifically 2 colors.
Okay,
and then, over the course of a time, eventually they settled on this idea of like, oh, what if it was guilds? And then they had like an identity, and we got to explore the kind of philosophy of the color pairs a bit more. And the rest is basically history. Original Ravnica was an incredibly successful set, and people still love the whole block to this day. The idea of the guilds has been incredibly resonant with Magic players. I would say that they are like almost as endemic to Magic now, I guess, as the colors themselves.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. There's so much, like, you don't have to go very far to see how people have taken the color pie image and made ones where it's like specifically about the guilds and what they're like, or what sort of player plays this, or it's such a big part of Magic culture, I think, at this point. And I think while some other color combinations have kind of lived longer in terms of like naming conventions and stuff like that for decks, the guilds are definitely always around. We don't usually call white-blue Azorius, but...
That's true. That depends on... So I remember reading that they've specifically learned that they should not give factions, like, 3-syllable names.
Yeah.
So, like, Azorius and Selesnya are both things that they consider mistakes as names. Because, like, they're just so long to say that nobody ever says Azorius anything. They just say blue-white.
Yeah.
But people do say, like, Rakdos.
Yeah.
Or
is it?
Yeah, is it really
Blitz?
common? And you can see that in like the Khans of Tarkir naming scheme.
Yeah,
everything is like Mardu,
Jeskai,
Timur, Jeskai, Abzan kind of thing. Sultai.
Same with Alara as well, like Grixis and
Jund, Naya. Yeah, very like simple names that can be like that can become shorthand. Because blue-white takes less time to say than Azorius, so...
It's not really filling the bill, as it were.
But so, okay, Original Ravnica, like, those are the things I think that have lived on in people's minds as, like, that is what Original Ravnica was about. It was about the guilds, it was about, like, solidifying their identity and what they are in the kind of Magic public consciousness. But looking at the set itself... I personally think it's kind of a big mess of just stuff. So much stuff went into Original Ravnica. There are like 680-ish cards in the block.
Jeez.
And I think that the guilds do not come through as strongly as they do in Return to Ravnica, certainly. Right. Because there's a lot of stuff in there where you're like, okay. I think that, at least partly, they were also thinking... Oh, city plane. That's the other. That's the thing that Ravnica is, and then the guilds are a part of the city plane. But what ended up happening was the guilds are the resonant thing, and the fact that they're all on a city plane kind of works, but isn't the driving theme.
Yeah.
So the things that are going on in Original Ravnica, there is an enchantment sub-theme, which mostly showed up in Draft, but there's a bunch of, like, Enchantment Matters cards. And, like, auras that care about your creatures being enchanted. Like, most of them are aura matters.
Yes.
There is a cycle of creatures called the Hunted Cycle, which spawn creatures for your opponent.
Which is interesting design. Though most of them are, like, terrible, aren't they?
So most of them are terrible, except for Hunted Dragon, which... ended up being good because you get to totally ignore the creatures it spawns for your opponent.
Yep, that makes sense.
And they often read better than they actually play, because you look at it and you're like, oh, well, yeah, I give him creatures, but my creature beats them. And then you're like, oh, yeah, but he gets the choice of how he uses those creatures, and he didn't pay any resources for them. Like, I paid resources to give him stuff and to give myself stuff. So he just got them, like, completely free. Yeah. There's the Nephilim, the 4-color
nonsense
non-legendary weirdo creatures, which we have never seen again, and which I doubt. Like, if I definitely had to confirm something that would not be in Guilds of Ravnica, I think the Nephilim will definitely not be in Guilds of Ravnica.
Are you kidding me? They're going to come back as legends, man.
Oh, that would be...
Commander players will rejoice around the world when they finally get those Nephilim they've been wanting.
They got them. They were in Commander 16, I think. They were in that Commander set. I mean, the Nephilim weren't. Actually, some of the Nephilim were, but they were like legendary 4-color creatures, so they were fine now.
That's true.
So the Nephilim were hanging out. There was a cycle of ley lines. I think it might have been the first cycle of ley lines, actually.
Yeah, well, ley lines were in both Ravnica and Return to Ravnica, no?
There were no ley lines in Return to Ravnica, I believe. There were ley lines in M15.
Yeah, okay.
But yeah, so there's a cycle of ley lines, some of which are terrible, like ley line of, I think, Life Force is in there, and ley line of Lightning.
Yeah, ley line of Lightning.
Ley line of Singularity.
Oh.
And then there's like ley line of the Void.
Which is great.
Eternal format staple. But yeah, they have ley lines in there for some strange reason. It is the return of split cards.
Split cards are my jam, though.
Split cards are an excellent mechanic.
I love split cards. I always loved the old split cards as well. I remember when I was first thumbing through Magic cards and making my first casual decks. Nothing kind of excited me more than being like, what the heck is this sideways card that has 2 things on it? How can I play this card? Most of them were not good. But
Yeah.
Ravnica had good ones.
Ravnica did have quite good ones. Although some of them were like very good on one side, and then the other side was like not worth it, but it didn't matter.
Yeah.
I can remember Odds Ends, where Odds was like 1 blue red, like target a spell. Flip a coin. If it's heads, counter the spell. If it's tails, copy the spell. And you're like, this doesn't ever do the thing I want it to do. But then ends is like 3 red white, target player sacrifices 2 attacking creatures. And you're like, bam, slam it in my limited deck. Definitely playing that one.
Get wrecked.
But yeah, so they had the return of split cards. They had the debut of hybrid mana, which
It's very cool.
It is a very cool mechanic that is probably the second biggest source of terrible custom cards.
Oh my god, you are so correct.
After Phyrexian mana, you see so many custom cards where people are like, yeah, I put a bunch of hybrid mana symbols on it. It's like, this card is incredibly confusing to read, and also, I don't think it's in Color Pie at all. But yeah, so I think it was the debut of hybrid mana, which would return in Lorwyn, and then also in Return to Ravnica. And which is a very cool mechanic, but kind of requires you to step quite carefully, I think, in the places you use it.
Yeah, and I think also, like, it can create really weird effects to, like, draft environments and stuff like that from, like, a design perspective. I'm thinking about Eventide and Shadowmoor.
Yeah.
And how oftentimes, like, I don't know, the way often hybrid mana reads me is like, oh, this is so much easier to like make a multicolored deck because like it's easier to get both sides of mana. You're never gonna get that mana screwed. If it's a white-green hybrid card, then it's like I'm never gonna be in a position where I have an opening hand and it's a bunch of forests and I'm like, oh dang, I can't play this card.
Yeah.
But the way it actually plays is like, oh, I'll just play monocolor.
Yeah.
Like I'm gonna draft all these hybrid things and they're all just gonna have a hybrid symbol with one color. And now I'll play them all.
Yeah. Like that was definitely how it worked in Eventide Shadowmoor. In Ravnica, you definitely didn't play any monocolor decks.
No,
in
absolutely not.
But Hybrid Mana did kind of allow you to smooth your draft a little bit, I think, because it gave you a bit more leeway of like, I think I'm going to end up Grixis. Oh, there's this like red-white hybrid card. I mean, I can play this.
Yeah.
It is a playable in this pack that I can pick kind of thing. Whereas otherwise you might just be looking at like, oh, well, there's a red-white card. Oh, there's a blue-white card. Oh, there's a black, what was I say, you were Grixis, like a black-green card, and you're like, I can't play any of these.
Yeah, absolutely.
And another thing that I kind of had forgotten was in Ravnica, but appears to be just like a thing for the whole, like the setting's identity, is like infinite weird build-around cards.
Can you give us some examples of infinite weird build-around cards?
Mind Moil was in original Ravnica. Dovescape was in original Ravnica.
Oh man, Dovescape. Just think about the enduring combo. You lock your opponent out with doves.
I encourage people to look at the original Ravnica set of like cards because honestly, there are so many super weird like enchantments that fundamentally alter how the game gets played. It is honestly just really interesting. There's also like a whole cycle of like Eidolons, which are creatures that you can sacrifice to do something, and then whenever you play a multicolored spell, you can return that card from your graveyard to your hand.
So much value.
Yeah.
I mean, I prefer Eidolons and Theros, man. Those are the business.
The Eidolons and Theros are pretty good. I think...
Oh, man. You
do
know
all
what?
of them see constructed play?
What was that?
The Eidolons and Theros, do all of them see constructed play?
No, there was so many.
Oh, that's true. I'm thinking of like the big rare cycle that was like Great Revel, Rhetoric, Blossoms kind of thing.
Yeah.
Those ones saw constructed play across various formats.
Yeah,
whereas like...
Yeah, in some formats or another. You know what's also great about Ravnica that I totally forgot about was the bounce lands.
Okay,
bounce lands were sick.
I was going to bring that up because a bit more when we get towards like the predictions for what we think is going to be the new set, because I want to talk about bounce lands a bit.
Okay, we can put a pin in it, but we also got the shock lands as well, which obviously are a huge part of Magic.
Yeah, I mean, I think that they're another thing that I think we should expect in the new Ravnica set. Mm-hmm. I think it's really hard to... Basically, like, when they did return to Ravnica, the Shocklands were on the list of things that they said, like, oh, this is key to Ravnica. We have to put these in. And I think once you've been to a plane twice and have had these cards show up both times, I think they start to become, like, linked. Especially when your plane is built around 2-color combinations.
Yeah.
And these cards enable 2-color combinations.
Absolutely.
I do have a bit more to say on them, but like I say, I want to talk about that a bit later when we talk about predictions more.
Okay.
But yeah, okay, so Original Ravnica has a bunch of strange stuff in it, and there's so much going on, and then in addition, it also has the guilds, and establishing their identity. It has a legendary creature for each guild. It has some, like, big, powerful spells for each guild to establish the kind of things that they do. And it has creature bases kind of to establish the idea of those guilds. And the fact that they managed to achieve all of the things that they have in this set to some relative success is kind of crazy to me. That this set was a success despite having so many disparate elements in it.
Okay, get this though. Like, I think Ravnica was such a success. Obviously, you're far more read on this stuff, the history.
Sure.
But when I started playing and looking at the cards from that set, what I liked is that there were simple multicolored cards that were just cool and flashy. You had things like Lightning Helix and Watch Wolf, which, like, they don't do a lot, but you're like, this is cool and powerful, and it's in these 2 colors, and I like that. Or, like, Red White Angels was a big one for me. Like, having, I've lost her.
I totally forgot the name.
It's not Aurelia, because she was in Return to Ravnica.
She was in Return to Ravnica. There was, I believe... I think that there was a legendary angel.
She was a 7/3 vigilance.
Okay, so there's
Razia.
Razia, Boros Archangel, who is 8 mana for a 6/3 with flying, vigilance, and haste, and she can tap to prevent the next 3 damage that would be dealt to a creature you control and have it be dealt to a different creature instead.
Yeah. Like, I looked at that card and I was like, this is just sick. And there's a bunch of cards in here I can play alongside this really sick thing that feels very flavorful and cool. And I felt like the flavor in Ravnica is pretty much like A+. Like, there's so many cards that I feel that way about. Like, all the guild mages were really sick as well. And using the hybrid mana, having so much abilities and stuff where it's like, these are exactly what these colors want to do. It's great. Like, that's what I think of when I think of Ravnica.
So yeah, I think that would be my takeaway from the original Ravnica block, was I think it succeeded due to some exceptional elements of it, in spite of some fairly big failures, in my opinion, in the kind of design. Which I'll get to in a minute, because I think the biggest failures are actually a lot of the guild mechanics in original Ravnica.
Okay.
Because I think a lot of them are way worse than anybody remembers.
Dude, what about, like, Convoke?
Convoke was great.
Yeah,
Convoke was probably the best one. But we'll get to the worst ones in a moment. So I also kind of want to talk about... So the difference... Actually, no, I'll talk about that a bit after. I kind of want to talk about the mechanics now. Because I think that is the other big thing. Because one of the things that Ravnica is kind of famous for is having a mechanic for every guild. Like, most blocks have not that many mechanics in them. Mm-hmm. I'm trying to think of, like...
They'll usually have, like, one for each color, right? Something to that effect?
I would guess, like, a bit less.
Okay.
Like, Kaladesh had what? Energy, Fabricate, Vehicles.
Yep.
Is there one I'm missing? There was Improvise in the set after.
Yeah.
But
No, I think that's mainly it.
I think that's about the things that were in Kaladesh.
Yeah.
But Kaladesh was, like, still quite a deep and complex drafting environment.
Well, a lot of it wasn't in the keywords, though, that was on the cards. It was just about the synergies.
I mean, that's definitely true.
Because, like, there was a lot of cards that were, like, Metalcraft cards, for example, on Kaladesh, but they didn't keyword it.
That's true. There was a couple of, like, Metalcraft cards. There was a couple of, like, affinity cards.
Mm-hmm.
But it still was, like, I don't know, there weren't that many actual keyword mechanics.
Yeah, which I think is your point. Whereas there's literally 10 keyword mechanics.
Yeah.
Across
Ravnica, original Ravnica block, and Return to Ravnica block. There are 10. So there are 20 keyword mechanics across both of these blocks. And I think that the difference between the two blocks, one of the major ones, in addition to, I think, a refocus on guilds in Return to Ravnica, because they've understood that is what was exciting about the original Ravnica set. And then it wasn't necessarily a lot of the kind of slightly weirder stuff, like the enchantment/aura kind of sub-theme and some other weirder stuff going on. But, like, the guild mechanics in the original set, let's just go down them in order.
Okay, how about this? You try and offer them to me, and I'll see if I know what they are.
Okay, so Azorius was Forecast.
I actually have no idea what that mechanic is.
So Forecast was in your upkeep.
Okay.
You may reveal this card that has Forecast from your hand and pay a cost and do an effect.
Okay. That's kind of cool.
So it sounds kind of interesting, but I think it has pretty awful play.
Well, yeah, because, like, I'm imagining, like, that sounds really cool, but if you make the effect so good, like, you'll just do it every upkeep, and you're just drawing cards and still getting an effect that's good, right? Or, and if it's really bad, it's like, why would I ever do this? I want to just play a creature.
Yeah. Let me pull up a list of the Forecast cards for you, because I think that's also sort of the thing. So, basically, in my opinion, Forecast is a pretty poor mechanic because it leads to very repetitive game states.
Okay.
Basically, like you say, if the Forecast thing is good to do, you will do it every turn. And it's very hard and limited for your opponent to stop you from doing it every turn.
Yes.
So, like, Pride of the Clouds is a rare 1/1 for 1 and a white. It has flying. It gets +1/+1 for each other creature in play with flying, and it has a Forecast ability. For 2, a white and a blue, you can reveal it from your hand and put a 1/1 white and blue bird token into play with flying into play. So you can only do it during your upkeep and only once each turn. It's like the little additional reminder text on Forecast.
Right.
So, in Limited,
I mean, if you draw this in the late game, like, it just gets out of control pretty quickly, right? Like, if you're at parity and you're just like, I see I draw this card that every turn makes a 1/1 flyer. Like,
that's a sick mana sink.
Yeah, it's awesome. And also, like, your opponent is like, okay, what happens if your opponent draws a land?
Yeah.
Oh god, I'm just getting snowballed.
But also, like, I can't interact with it at all.
Yeah.
Like, it never goes away.
And I'm not going to put, like, discard decks in my limited deck.
Yeah. Maybe you do, cards. Like, post-board against Pride of the Clouds, but basically it just will lead to a lot of very repetitive game states. And I think that they sort of know this, because there's a lot of the Forecast cards are relatively weak. So, like, Paladin of Prav is a 6-mana 3/4, basically with lifelink. Lifelink wasn't keyworded at this time, but it's the same thing. It's whenever it deals damage, you gain life.
Sure.
And then you can pay a 1 and a white and reveal it from your hand in your upkeep to basically give another creature lifelink until the end of your turn.
That's okay, but you need, like, so many things to be like, okay, I need a creature that's good enough that they're going to want to tango in combat, you know what I mean? And also, like, if it's later on in the game, like, I'll probably just want to play a 3/4 lifelinker.
Yeah. So, like, that's the sort of thing where basically I think that the design space for Forecast is really small because you need you need an effect that is, like, interesting, both white and blue, and, like, you kind of want to do more than once because otherwise it's kind of a weird mechanic to have on your thing. Like, why not just have the spell be slightly more expensive and, like, have it do the Forecast effect if you're only going to want to do the Forecast effect once, for example.
Yeah, okay.
So, like, Plumes of Peace is 1 blue-white for an enchantment aura. Enchanted creature doesn't untap during its controller's untap step, and you can forecast it for a white and a blue to tap target creature.
That's kind of cool.
Yeah, it's like a claustrophobia.
Yeah, you can build your own claustrophobia
Yeah.
for 5 mana.
That one can also be used to, like, get rid of a blocker temporarily.
Yeah.
If you're like, oh, okay, cool, I want to, like, tap this one, and then this other one attacked me, so I'll put it on that other one, because I don't want that one to untap, but this lets me, like, get in this turn past a chump blocker.
Yeah, and I guess also thinking about it from an opponent's point of view, that can kind of feel really terrible as well, where you're like, oh, I have to race now.
Yeah.
Like, because I can't really block.
Yeah, because he's just going to get to tap something of mine every turn.
Yeah. So I guess now I'm racing. And then your opponent's like, oh, great, now I don't have to pay the stupid cost in my upkeep.
Yeah.
So they end up not using the forecast ability.
Basically, my takeaway from Forecast is that... Okay, so no, but seriously, I think it's I think it has a small design space because it has to be something you kind of want to do repeatedly. And then also, you really don't want to push it very hard.
Mm-hmm.
Because if you do, you make these really miserable limited games where you're going, oh, I drew my Forecast bomb, I'm going to do this every turn. Oh, you're not playing black? Okay, cool, you can't stop me.
Yeah, that's pretty disgusting, actually.
So, I think that the Azorius mechanic in the original Ravnica set was a total miss.
Right.
Alright, Dimir had Transmute.
Okay, Transmute, I believe, is you have a card with X casting cost. You can pay the Transmute cost to discard this card and tutor your deck for a card that has the same cost.
Yeah.
Sick.
So you can... Transmute lets you discard cards to search your library for a card with the same CMC.
I think the funny part is the card that I think of with Transmute is not a Dimir card from Ravnica.
No.
It is Teleria West.
Yes, which shows up specifically because tutoring for 0 CMC things is, like, interesting and useful in several modern decks.
Yes.
But yeah, Dimir, also Transmute is a mechanic I would be very surprised to ever see come back, but not necessarily because I think it was terrible, mostly because it was a tutoring mechanic.
Yeah, and they tend to not like printing tutors, because when they're really good, they just kind of crack the game in half.
Partly, and also, let's say that in Limited, you have a guild whose entire mechanic is about tutoring. Every Limited game, part of the allure of Limited, right, is that every game is going to play out a bit more differently than you would expect in Constructed.
Yeah,
because your deck is
decks
built
are
out
less
of, like,
consistent. You play with more different cards. They aren't necessarily all very high power level.
Sure.
So the card pool's bigger.
Yeah, but if there's good Transmute cards, then okay, cool. I'll sacrifice. I'll discard this like 2 CMC thing to get my good 2 CMC kill spell. Kill your thing.
Yeah, I can...
It leads to very like repetitive games because people are able to just find whatever the things they need. As a result, most of the Transmute cards aren't very good because it's incredibly hard to balance.
Yes.
Because sometimes that card, like the text on the card, is less relevant than its CMC and the word Transmute on it.
I mean, looking back, I think the only other card I can think of with Transmute is Muddle the Mixture. And I'm not going to lie, I don't think I know what its actual front side does. I only know that it transmutes for 3...
For 2, yeah.
Yeah.
So, Muddle the Mixture is blue, counter-target instant or sorcery spell.
Right.
And you can pay 3 and discard it to search your library for a 2 CMC thing. It shows up sometimes in, like, weird Thopter Decks.
Yeah.
I've
seen in other kind of, like, Brewski things before, but that's about it.
Yeah. So, most of the Transmute cards are pretty poor. I'm just looking through them now. Most of them are like pretty overcosted creatures. or like slightly inefficient bounce spells. There's a couple that are like reasonable limited kill spells. But it's because so as a result, you make this mechanic that you can't make too good because then it will be like busted. But reads really poorly to new players.
Yep.
Because they're like, why would I want this spell that isn't very good? Oh, I can discard it to get a different one?
That's weird.
And I don't want to do that.
Yeah, I don't know why that's as good as it is.
Yeah. And, also, it's not like you're excited as a more enfranchised player who's playing more competitively to be like, oh yeah, I've got this cool transmute deck.
Mm-hmm.
It's not an exciting play pattern, really, to be like, okay, cool, I'll search my library for my best thing and play that.
Yeah, I get what you're saying. That makes sense.
So, okay, this is going to be a theme with the Dimir mechanics. I don't think they've ever made a good Dimir mechanic. I don't think they think they've ever made a good Dimir mechanic. But Transmute was it wasn't terrible, but it's really clear looking at the cards that they made it, and then we're like, oh my god, we can't push this.
Yeah.
Oh, how do we make these cards good, but... how do we make people want to play with these cards, but also not make them, busted?
Yeah, and I can imagine, actually, there was probably a fair amount of time in R&D where they were like, these are cool cards, but we're going to have to just, add 1 or 2 mana to all of these.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Or a vast majority of them.
Yeah, or add mana to, the transmute cost to make it less appealing as a, pseudo-demonic tutor.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, Rakdos had Hellbent. You should know this one.
Yeah, everyone knows this one. Hellbent is just when you have no cards in hand, do something.
Yeah.
Features on amazing cards like what is the tutor called?
If you can name one that isn't the tutor.
Infernal Tutor.
If you can name one that isn't the tutor, I will give you a snack. After recording.
A snack? Man, I really do want a snack. But I feel like there's a card, isn't there a fireball that has Hellbent? And it can't be prevented if you're Hellbent or something like that? Maybe that's too much like Banefire and I'm getting confused.
We'll double check that one, but
I
don't believe
yeah,
so.
It's just Infernal Tutor, right?
Infernal Tutor is, I believe, the only Hellbent card that has seen widespread constructed play. There is a fireball with Hellbent that cannot be countered and the damage can't be prevented if you have Hellbent.
Yeah, Demon Fire.
There's also Gobhobbler Rats, Anthem of Rakdos, Jagged Poppet. There's a lot of Hellbent cards. I'm going to go ahead and put it on the line that I think Hellbent was actually quite a good mechanic.
Yeah, I think Hellbent is awesome. It rewards you for being more all in. It gets better effects and it helps when you're top decking. And I feel like that is a rewarding feeling of oh, I've played the game in such a manner where now my cards are all kind of boosted and better. And I also think that's exactly what the color pair wants to do, is just be vomit my hand and let's go.
I think it's... I actually semi-disagree, because I think that a lot of the times in Limited, your red-black deck is actually a removal-based control deck.
Yeah, that's
commonly
fair.
in Limited, you end up in red-black because you're like, oh, here's a good red removal spell. Here's a good black removal spell. And you just end up in the removal spell deck. But that, I think, is actually often a fail case in a Limited environment. You don't want to design the red-black removal spell deck. That's not a very exciting deck, and it shows up all the time.
Yeah.
So when you're making a specific red-black color pair that needs to have an identity, you kind of want to give them something that's not just, oh, well, I picked up the good removal spell, and then the other good removal spell, and then this is my deck now.
Yeah.
So Hellbent encourages you to play in a very different way. Encourage you to say, okay, I'm not a very expensive removal spell deck because removal spells are not very good with Hellbent. Because you're like, oh, yeah, I got this murder. Opponent hasn't played a creature good enough for it yet, though, so none of my Hellbent cards are on. I do think that a lot of the Hellbent cards are a little bit conservative in the original Ravnica set. And some of them are kind of crazy. Jagged Poppet is 1 black-red for a 3/4. Whenever it is dealt damage, you discard that many cards. And if you're Hellbent, when it deals combat damage to a player, if you have no cards in your hand, that player discards cards equal to the amount of damage you just dealt to them.
What? That card is awesome.
So that card's cool, but I think as a new player, you read it and you're like, it'll make me discard 4 cards. And And it kind of... I think that Hellbent's only major problem, in my opinion, is that it reads kind of poorly to a lot of newer players who are like,
right,
but I don't want to discard my cards.
Yeah, that's fair.
Like, I want to have cards in my hand. And they don't really understand that, like... It was kind of similar to Hazaret when she got released. And a lot of people were like, do I really want to be on 0 cards, though? And you're like, yeah, but you're playing red.
Yeah.
You're going to get there.
Exactly. I was about to say, I think... Yeah, listen up, new players, because I think you need to enjoy the flip and rip game that is top decking a little bit more. Don't hoard those cards in your hand. Just peel them when you need them. That's how I win games of Magic.
Yeah. Yes, Scottish National Magic the Gathering champion who won off of the back of Teferi. I win games of Magic by top decking.
Yep.
But yeah, I think that Hellbent is actually a very well-designed mechanic that really fits the color pair, and I would be very excited to see them bring it back, especially with like new design philosophies. The only reason I would not expect to see it again is because we had something very similar in Amonkhet. We had the like 1 or 0 like mechanic, which showed up.
Gods.
Yeah, with like showed up on Hazaret, and I think it showed up on a couple of other cards in Limited. There was like a lizard that got a buff if you had 1 or 0 cards.
Thresher lizard?
Yeah, something like that.
Something like that.
It wasn't a major theme, so we definitely could see Hellbent again. But I think that I would be really interested personally in seeing like a newer, more modern take on Hellbent, because I think that the mechanic is really fun and pushes you to play the game in a slightly different way, but not one that's like totally insane, like some of the later mechanics.
I also think like it opens up design space for a lot of cool cards that go alongside Hellbent to like enable it. Like going back to Amonkhet, thinking about like Blood Rage Brawler and being able to be like, yeah, we can play a 4/3 for 2 and discard a card because discarding is not a cost anymore. It's actually making my deck better. Yeah. Which is awesome. And I think that's really cool, really fun, and really rewarding. I agree. I would like to see Hellbent come back.
The Gruul had Bloodthirst, which is also a relatively good mechanic.
So I believe I always get this one confused with another mechanic that's quite similar, maybe Morbid or something like that. Bloodthirst X. So it goes Bloodthirst and then a number, and I think Bloodthirst is if the opponent was dealt damage, put +1/+1 counters on the creature equal to the Bloodthirst cost?
Yes.
Yes!
So Bloodthirst is a creature mechanic that's to do with +1/+1 counters, and basically like it rewards you for being aggressive. If an opponent was dealt damage this turn, then that creature enters with like the Bloodthirst value of +1/+1 counters. It lets you do some interesting things where you play around with creatures having like a different or variable power matters to their power level. So the original set had stuff like Battering Worm, which had Bloodthirst 1 and like had creatures with power less than this creature can't block it.
Okay.
So like if you get the Bloodthirst, it's like noticeably more powerful because now 4 power creatures can't block it anymore. And I remember there being more like things that made a bit more of a difference based on the kind of Bloodthirst thing. Bloodthirst did come back in M12.
Yeah, I was about to say that I seem to recall that there was other Bloodthirst cards because I was racking my brain and trying to think of cards that were from Ravnica that had Bloodthirst, and I was like, wasn't there like a Phoenix or something like that? And I was like, that doesn't sound very Ravnica.
I actually think the Phoenix might have come from Ravnica, but I guess I'll yeah, it definitely did because it's got the same name as some other Gruul stuff.
Is this Skargan Firebird?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, so there's just like Bloodthirst plays really well in Limited. It rewards you for being aggressive. Sometimes the cards read a little bit worse than they kind of play because, you know, like Scab Clan Mauler is red-green for a 1/1 with Trample and Bloodthirst 2. Which means that if, you're very rarely going to be playing it on 2, because that means your limited deck needs to have a certain amount of 1-drops, which is going to be tough in a multicolor set anyway.
Yes.
But, the card plays reasonably well, because commonly you can get to a point where it's a 3/3 Trample, and
for 2.
Yeah, for 2.
Not bad.
It's
and
great.
if on turn 4, you hit them with your 3-drop, and you go play this and play another 2-drop, it's like, okay.
Yeah.
This could be pretty sick. I can get behind this.
And so they have already brought back Bloodthirst once, like I say, in M12, and I think it was relatively successful there. They've certainly said that it was much better received then, because it basically was sort of lukewarm received in original Ravnica. Apparently, people didn't dislike it, but they didn't really take to it. Whereas I think that they found the spot of how they want to use Bloodthirst a bit better in M12. It also probably helps that you're able to put it on cards that weren't red or green, and you're able to play around with it was mostly a Jund mechanic, but they were able to do fun stuff with it.
I think one of the cool parts about this, from a limited perspective as well, Bloodthirst, is it makes blocking really weird. When your opponent is in those colors and they swing with a little dude, normally you'd be like, great, they don't have a blocker, cool, let it go. I'm gonna swing crack back for a bunch. You have to kind of reconsider and be like, oh, now I have to block this thing, and that's really bad if they have a trick.
Yeah.
But it's really bad if I let it through and they get to play I'm going to play my Bloodthirst 3 guy. And you're like, oh god, that's so bad.
Yeah, I really wish I blocked now. And it does that sort of thing. And it's kind of similar to Raid in that way, where it encourages people to make plays that they maybe wouldn't always make.
Yeah.
And makes people play in slightly different fashions and find new kind of play patterns, which is actually quite good for a mechanic. The only thing I say about Bloodthirst is that I personally don't think it's particularly exciting outside of that.
Yeah, I get that. There's only aggressive decks, or relatively aggressive decks, are going to want Bloodthirst. And if you're playing the mid-rangey reactive, you're trying to lock up the board and win the late game, your Bloodthirst cards are just going to be overcosted and a lot of points in the game.
Yeah. And also, some people just don't get excited about mechanics that put +1/+1 counters on creatures. And this is a relatively straightforward version of those mechanics. It's not kind of like Graft or Evolve, which kind of have often some kind of wrinkles to them that add kind of fun, weird strategies. This one is just, you want to be hitting your opponent, and you want to keep hitting them so your Bloodthirst cards keep getting turned on.
I mean, this sounds great to me, but
it's definitely
obviously that's
bad.
not for every player. I get
that. Okay, I don't have that much more to say about Bloodthirst. I wouldn't be surprised to see it come back, but I also wouldn't be shocked if it didn't.
For
basically. Sure. Selesnya had Convoke. If you can name a card from original Ravnica with Convoke that was not Chord of Calling, I don't know what I'll give you, but you win.
I feel like there's a Cytokin spawner, something like that. I feel like there's a spawner of some variety where it's a 4/4 and it's got Convoke, and maybe it makes plants. I don't know.
Okay, so Convoke is interesting because it is already confirmed to come back in the new set.
Dang it. I already knew some cards. He pulled up the page and I was like, oh, I knew some of these. Anyways, go on.
But yeah, so it's already confirmed to come back because we have the Biobox promo, which is
just a big green dude, isn't it?
It's a 16/16 indestructible worm for 10 mana, and it has Convoke.
Right. They're really pushing the thick green things this set.
I mean, I don't think this guy is better than Galta, so...
Yeah, but combine him with Galta and thick Dino Boy, Gigantosaur.
That's true. There have been a lot of very big green creatures with either cost reduction or a smaller cost than you'd expect to do with them. That's definitely true. But yeah, so Convoke is a card that I think a mechanic that I think is interesting. So it's confirmed that it's coming back, so we know it's going to be the Selesnya mechanic. Or at least I think we're almost 100% on that. Some people have said the Biobox promo could have a different mechanic than the entire rest of the set, but I think that would be
silly.
A very strange decision. Mm-hmm. This is also a mechanic that has come back relatively recently. It came back in M15. Mm-hmm. And also, as a result, we've seen it explored a bit more outside of the kind of Ravnica guild color pair, because we've seen now white cards with there were white cards in the original. We've seen red cards with Convoke and black cards with Convoke, and some blue cards with Convoke. It is also a mechanic that is, I think, quite difficult to develop properly because the difference between it in Limited and it in Constructed is huge.
Mm-hmm.
So, the only major Constructed players that I think have really broken through with Convoke are Court of Calling, which is still like a modern...
Yep.
I mean, I think it's become a bit less of a modern, like, powerhouse recently.
Yeah, it's definitely a staple, though. Like, it's a modern staple. It enables enough strategies between elves and the Court of... Well, Kiki Chord and other Collected Company decks.
Yeah. But it definitely... It's been around for a while, and it's always been, like, a good, like, piece of the green toolbox.
I remember when M15 came out, and people were just hyped about Court of Calling. Being like, great, they're reprinting it.
So, Court of Calling... and Stoke the Flames. And then, I actually don't know if Sprout Swarm made it into Constructed, but I wouldn't be totally surprised because that card was real busted.
In Limited, right?
Yeah. But yeah, so it was Stoke the Flames and Court of Calling are the two ones that, I look back on and go, oh yeah, those are the successful Convoke cards. But almost all the rest of them have ended up being, very medium.
Yeah. I've played some Conclave Phalanx in Pauper.
Oh!
Gains so much life.
But basically the problem is, let's say you make this really good creature with Convoke, and you're pushing it for Constructed, and you really want to see if there's you can make a go wide Constructed deck have a real shot, so it has this cool payoff.
Okay.
Alright, this card is insane in Limited. It just totally takes over every game it gets played in, and it's just really absurd. And maybe you can do that with one card, but it's really hard to push too many.
Yeah.
And as a result, most of the cards you see with Convoke are aimed at being balanced for Limited, because games of Limited just are more conducive to Convoke, right? So in case anyone doesn't know, I realize we haven't actually said the mechanic. Convoke is basically you can tap creatures to help pay for the spell.
Basically, all your creatures become mana dorks, so long as you're casting a spell with Convoke.
Yes, and they can also tap for... So in addition to any creature being able to tap for any part of the generic cost, you can also tap creatures of that color to pay for the colored source requirement.
Yeah, so you can tap a white creature to add white mana, a blue creature to add blue mana, etc.
Yeah. You don't actually add any mana, but sure, it plays very similarly. But yeah, so... Games of Limited are really conducive to these cards being really good. Because in Limited, you play a 2-2, your opponent plays their 2-2, and you're playing the Convoke deck, so you're okay, cool, I'm not going to attack.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just going to sit here. Or, your opponent plays a 2-2, and you play a Raise the Alarm that puts 2 1-1s into play, and your opponent's oh, okay, cool. Well, I don't really want to attack, because it gives you more options. If you have a trick, you get to, trade a 1-1, or just your trick for my thing, and,
Yep.
Basically, games of Limited always end up being in a situation, or almost always end up being in a situation where Convoke is way stronger in them. So, if you push Convoke stuff at common and uncommon especially, for it to be maybe see play outside of Limited, it's going to bust your Limited format in half, because the Convoke deck is just going to be way better than everybody else.
Yeah, I think it's important that you have the Convoke effects be powerful enough that you'd want to cast them normally, but situational enough where it's not going to bust in half. I felt like Stoke the Flames was similar to that, where in Limited, Stoke the Flames was not nuts.
Yeah.
But it was pretty awesome in Constructed. And another one was Devouring Light, which didn't see that much Constructed play. That's another one from M15. But basically the synergies I had with things in that set, Raise the Alarm, meant occasionally you'd be able to double spell on a turn you couldn't.
Sure.
But that was it. It wasn't you were okay, play this thing, you're dead now.
Yeah. Court of Calling is another example of not a very good effect in Limited.
Mm-hmm.
In Limited, it's basically just give one of your creatures flash and add 3 mana to its cost.
Yeah.
Yes, you get to tutor for it, but in Limited, you're very rarely going to be having creatures that are so good they're worth tutoring for.
Yeah.
Especially if your rare pick was Court of Calling.
Yeah, for sure.
So everything needs to kind of come together for Chord to be really broken, and it's not like at the peak of its power level. Whereas in Constructed, you can fill your deck with like one-ofs of specific creatures that are very good in this situation. That make Chord of Calling a lot better. So I am interested to see what they do with Convoke, because I think that it's the sort of thing that asks you to have a lot of tokens in play, generally. Like, that's what Convoke likes. And it's also what Selesnya likes. Selesnya has always had a theme of making tokens. And they have already printed a card that, like, hoses token strategies.
Good old Chain Whirler and Plague Mare.
Plague Mare is less played right now, but Chain Whirler is definitely, like, still very heavily played.
But what I'm saying is that, like, there are decks that exist where it's like, if the mana is good enough, they could be like, I want 6 Chain Whirlers. And they would be, like, have that strategy open to them if tokens got really, really good, for example.
That's true. I do kind of want to talk about mana in the future.
Yes.
Because I think that that's going to be one of the biggest things about the new set that is kind of up in the air right now, but I think will affect stuff a lot. But yeah, but that was Convoke. Simic had Graft.
Graft is like Graft X, so it enters with this many +1/+1 counters. When another creature enters the battlefield, you can move the +1/+1 counters from this creature to another creature?
You can move a +1/+1 counter from the Graft creature to the creature that's entering. Graft is a mechanic whose main problem comes from Magic Online. So, Graft's problem is that it triggers on every creature entering the battlefield.
Sure.
So your opponent plays a creature.
Mm-hmm.
And your Graft creature triggers, and you have to click OK.
Yeah.
And click No, I don't want to put a counter on it. And you have to do this every time a creature enters the battlefield. So it's just a pain.
That being said, I've always really enjoyed this mechanic in play, like when it came back for Modern Masters 2. And they reprinted some of the Graft cards. I thought it was pretty fun, like...
I do think that Graft is a pretty fun mechanic that has a lot of knobs to it, a lot of interesting stuff. There's cards like Helium Squirter,
yeah,
which like allow you to give creatures with +1/+1 counters flying, and then also like give creatures +1/+1 counters. Like I say, Graft being able to put +1/+1 counters on opponent's creatures is important for cards like Cytoplast Manipulator, which allow you to gain control of a creature with a +1/+1 counter on it, as long as that creature remains in play. So, like, your opponent plays a creature, and you're like, okay, cool, I'll move a counter from my guy to your guy, and then I'll gain control of it.
I did not even know you could do that with Graft. That is nuts.
That is, like... I mean, that's the reason why it's so awkward on Magic Online. Because, like I say, every time your opponent plays a creature, the game's like, do you want to put a +1/+1 counter on it? And you're like, no, please.
Plaxcaster Frogling. I've won games of Magic with that.
Yeah, gives creatures with +1/+1 counters on them Shroud. Yeah, in general, Graft, I think, was an interesting mechanic that may never come back because of the digital problems. But I actually thought it was quite fun in Limited and caused you to do a bunch of stuff where you were like, oh, okay, cool, I'll play this cool Graft creature, and then I'll play, like, a token-making thing. Mm-hmm. I'll put all the counters from it onto all of these guys. And then, awesome.
Build your own overrun.
Yeah, or something similar. But I wouldn't be surprised for them to never bring it back because of the digital problems. But I think it was actually, like, personally, I found it like quite an interesting limited mechanic.
Yeah, I felt like I had doubt in the fact that I didn't even know you could put it on your opponent's creatures, and that could be something that could be played with. Is like, really interesting to me.
So the Orzhov had maybe the second worst designed mechanic, in my opinion, and the third worst fit mechanic.
Okay.
No, not the worst fit. Second worst fit, second worst designed. Haunt. Can you tell me what Haunt does?
Okay, Haunt. So, a creature with Haunt will have an ETB. Is it? So it'll ETB and trigger, and then it'll have Haunt, which means once it dies, it like haunts another creature, and when that creature dies, it does the same effect, or something ridiculous like that.
That is the essence of Haunt. There are also spells with Haunt, which do sort of a similar thing, but play a little bit more differently. When you play them, they immediately go on haunting something, whereas creatures with haunt stick around on the battlefield for a little while first.
I was about to say, isn't it like Orzhov Pontiff is what I'm thinking of? That's
Orzhov Pontiff is
I've lost a lot to that card.
That's because you play mostly like Death and Taxes.
Yeah, exactly.
So Orzhov Pontiff is the famous card with haunt. And having haunt does matter sometimes because you can do weird stuff with sack outlets where you like put its trigger on the stack and then sack it haunting something. Like one of your opponent's creatures that's going to die to its trigger. And then when that creature dies, you get to trigger it again. But most of the cards with haunt... basically, the problem with this mechanic is it's just incredibly confusing about when you do stuff.
Yeah. And there's memory issues. Like, you have to remember which card is haunted. I guess you can, like, exile it, like, tuck it underneath.
Yeah, so haunt does exile the card. So you do get to, like, put it underneath things. But yeah, so, like...
I think it's telling. I think it's telling that I got the mechanic right. But as I was saying it, I was like, this can't be right. Right? This sounds really messed up.
Yeah. It's just a very difficult mechanic to like, communicate to people. So in the Great Designer Search 3, we actually saw a pretty interesting take on Haunt by one of the designers. I've totally forgotten which one, so I apologize to them profusely. But
profusely.
I remember that there was some interesting designs on Haunt. Some stuff like they did like a 1 and a black 2/2 that can't block. And when it dies, it haunts a creature, and the creature it's haunting can't block.
Ooh,
Changing Haunt from being like this weird ETB trigger...
Instead being like a static thing?
Yeah, I think that would be an excellent direction to take it in. But basically, because Haunt was an ETB trigger and when the creature it's haunting dies trigger.
Yeah.
Which is...
Really
there's so
weird.
many steps between when you play the Haunt creature and when you get the payoff for your creature having Haunt. That it's just a really weird, complex mechanic.
And I hope they burn it with fire and never bring it back. At least in its current iteration.
They are very unlikely to ever bring it back. I think it is probably one of the like. It's just an absolute failure from a design perspective of a mechanic because it just didn't communicate the things it was trying to communicate at all effectively. Had Replicate.
Replicate's a great mechanic. You basically, they're usually on 1 or 2 mana cards, and you can pay the Replicate cost to make a copy of that spell again. So, for example, Giga Drowse.
Yes.
My boy.
Giga Drowse, Train of Thought, that card was sick in Limited.
Shattering Spree.
Shattering Spree, that card is still like $10.
For some reason. But yeah, it's really awesome where basically you have this cheap effect, and you can just pay the cost a bunch of times to do it a bunch of times.
Yeah, Replicate's really fun. I do think that there is a ceiling to the design space, especially if you're limiting yourself to Is It.
Yeah, and absolutely, like, certain effects I think are just, like, absolute no-nos, and you can't really put Replicate on it. Like, you can't really put Replicate on, like, Burn. Yeah,
they actually have done that, but it's been very weak burn, like Pyromantics.
Is it like Spark Jolt or something?
It's like 2 mana, deal 1.
Yeah.
Replicate for 2.
Exactly, where it's like, it has to be, like, pretty bad, because otherwise, like... If it's like Shock, Replicate, it's like, oh god.
So the thing about Replicate for burn is that actually what you're describing is mostly Fireball.
Yeah, exactly. But generally at like a better rate.
Yeah. Well, like, so you end up being like, if you make it a better rate than Fireball, that's insane. If you just make it a worse rate than Fireball, is it that interesting?
Yeah, exactly.
So Replicate is quite a good, interesting mechanic. I wouldn't be surprised to see them bring it back, but Is It has actually been I think maybe the only guild where I think that they've just, like, had a great mechanic both times.
Yeah, I don't know. I can't say I know how good Replicate was in Limited.
It was pretty good. Is It was one of the more powerful guilds, and Train of Thought and Pyromantics were both, like, pretty strong. Train of Thought specifically was, like, excellent. Because it was just... Train of Thought was 1 and a blue, draw a card. Replicate for 1 and a blue. So, on its front mode, it's not very good. Like, 1 and a blue cycle isn't great, but, I mean, it can get you out of, like, mana screw situations sometimes.
Is it an instant?
No.
Okay.
In Limited, it was still just great because the format was very slow.
4 mana draw 2 or a 6
4
mana
draw 2, 6 mana draw 3, 8 mana draw 4.
Is pretty reasonable.
Yeah, you start to get... The fact that it can be any of those is where it starts to get like quite strong.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I think Replicate was just a great mechanic.
I just love Giga Drowse, man. It's great for time walking opponents.
Giga Drowse is a pretty cool spell.
Making your control opponents tap out when you're playing Storm.
There was a super weird spell with Replicate that was 4 mana, search target player's library for... Like, choose a permanent, search your opponent's library for a copy... For, like, a card with the same name, and put it into play. Replicate for its original mana cost, which is 3 and a blue.
What?
Yeah.
That is so weird.
It's called, like, Mimeofracture.
I mean... It could be kind of cool, but it's so weird.
It's absurdly weird.
It's kind of like a weird clone effect.
Yeah.
But if
your opponent has to be running another copy of it. So it's reasonably constructed where you can expect everyone to be running 4 copies of things.
Yeah, exactly. But in Limited, it's completely useless.
Yeah, you could see it in, like, current, like, Scarab God deck sideboards, maybe. Mm-hmm. You'd be like, oh, you've got a Scarab God? I'll take one of your Scarab Gods.
Man... I just want to cast it against Siege Rhino. Siege Rhino? Draining? Sick. Mimeofracture?
Mimeofracture twice?
Yeah, get 2 Siege Rhinos? Oh! Double lightning helix.
Okay, so then we get to the biggest mistake of a mechanic in original Ravnica block. I'm sure some people will be upset by this, but like, I'm really sorry. It was definitely a mistake. The Golgari mechanic was Dredge.
So, Dredge X means when this card is in your graveyard, you can mill X cards, like the Dredge X cost, and then draw this card from your graveyard instead.
Yeah, instead of drawing a card.
Exactly. You take it from your graveyard, you put it into your hand. Most notably on things like Stinkweed Imp,
Golgari Grave Troll, Life from the Loam,
Thug.
Yeah.
Golgari Thug. All these things are terrible. I don't think we need to talk about it too much. Dredge was a design mistake.
Dredge was a horrendous mistake. It has led to a lot of interesting decks in... and it's probably the most enduring mechanic from original Ravnica. And the one that changed Magic the most.
Yeah, that's fair. But, I mean, the way it changed Magic was by kind of cracking the thing in half.
A little bit, yeah.
Like, taking it over the knee and just...
Yeah. There is a reason I think that we saw Rest in Peace and Return to Ravnica.
Yeah.
But yeah, Dredge was a real crazy decision. I mean, obviously it's really hard for them to see that people are going to play decks where it does not matter what this card says. It says Dredge 6, so that's good enough for me.
Yeah. Like, okay, so this is the thing with it, and something I didn't really realize when I saw the Dredge cards is like, oh, maybe this made sense in Limited. But actually the way it plays out is just like, mill 2 cards, get the best card that you've played this game.
Yeah.
Or like, just always draw a card. You will never not draw gas. Yeah. And it's like, ugh. Like, a lot of slow formats come down to, like, who draws more lands, or, like, whose exchange resources the best. And if the way you exchange resources is, like, I'm getting back a 2/2 Death Touch every turn, and I'm going to continue swinging with it until you kill it, and then I'm going to get it back again. Yeah. It's like,
Like, there is a reason that Golgari Gravetroll has Dredge 6. It's because they thought, oh, this card's really powerful and limited. We've got to make sure people can't just dredge it a bunch.
Whoops.
Like, and also it's a kind of mechanic that's hard to develop because, okay, you add another cost to Golgari Gravetroll's mana cost. Mm-hmm. What does that do?
Well, nothing.
Yeah, exactly. So you kind of it has a lot of knobs, but very few of them matter, and most of the stuff that you would normally do to balance a card doesn't work. So Dredge is a terrible mistake. I know some people really like the decks that it creates, and it does let you play Magic in a very different way. But it was definitely... Like, they definitely had no idea what they were doing when they made it. And the final mechanic in original Ravnica is the one that I think is the weirdest, which is... And I'm sure that you must know this, because it's your like, soul guild. This is the Boros mechanic from original Ravnica. It's called Radiance.
Yeah, so... Radiance. I have no idea what this mechanic does. Is it like... I feel like there's something about having permanence of a certain amount of colors or something.
It is to do with colors.
But
so Radiance is like this spell affects a thing and everything that shares a color with it.
Right.
So there's a spell that...
so if it's like a instant that's like 1 white mana +1/+1 Radiance, you cast it on a white creature, all the other white creatures get +1/+1.
all other white creatures.
Oh, so your opponents do too.
Yeah. This is important because I think that's a major design mistake of the mechanic, actually. But so there's a card that's like 1 and a white, destroy target enchantment, and all enchantments that share a color with it.
Ooh. But all of my O-rings.
Yeah. Well, so the problem with Radiance is kind of twofold. One is that as a mechanic for the Boros Guild, it is terrible. It doesn't communicate their ideology or their gameplay style at all.
Yeah.
Like, Sky Knight Legionnaire is the card I think of when I think of, like, original Ravnica Boros.
Okay.
It's like 3 mana, 2/2, flying haste. It's aggressive. It has some like trickiness to it more than Rakdos.
Not Wojak veterans.
What do they do? Like a 3/1, like a 3/2. Yeah, it's aggressive. It has some trickiness to it that it gets because of like the white, whereas black tends to be like the contrast with Rakdos' aggression. It's like Rakdos is like, no, I'm just gonna hit you really hard, and Boros is like, I'm gonna hit you hard, but I've got like first strike, or double strike.
Sure.
Or like flying and associated with my stuff. And it's got haste. It's a whole combination of red and white aggression. That card is very iconic of Boros to me. Whereas Radiance tells me nothing about Boros. It's like, oh, they affect the things that share colors?
Mm-hmm.
So it doesn't really communicate Boros at all. And, like... in a complicated limited game, in a multicolor set, where your opponents are going to be playing like 3+ colors and have a bunch of stuff on the board with a bunch of different colors on it, and you're like, okay, cool. I'm going to target your green-blue creature with my thing that deals a damage to everything that shares a color with this creature this creature.
All the blue and green creatures on the board now have one
damage marked on them. Oh, wait. Oh, no, I'm playing Bant. Oh, I guess this dies on my side of the board. Oh, I didn't think about that. It's the sort of thing that requires you to like be keeping constant track of something that we don't commonly keep track of in Magic board states, which is the shared colors
on
creatures
both sides of the table.
On both sides of the table.
Yeah.
And the fact that it's A, you will often cast it and be like, see what happens, and B, sometimes you'll cast it and be like, oh wait, I forgot it affected my stuff. I guess I'm actually in a worse position now.
Yeah, this sucks.
Yeah, so it just like all around, like Radiance is a pretty mediocre mechanic in my opinion, but it especially as bad as a Boros mechanic because it just doesn't fit them.
It says a lot that I don't remember this mechanic.
Yeah,
at all.
Yeah, and Boros was like a pretty good guild in original Ravnica.
It was sick.
Like, and I don't just mean because it was red and white. I mean, like,
no.
In the limited environment, it was actually pretty good.
Yeah, I mean, just like inherently good.
Yeah,
because Lightning Helix.
But Radiance was just not a part of that at all.
No.
Whereas like Hellbent, you're like, yeah, that's super Rakdos.
Yeah.
Radiance, you're like,
what?
I don't even know what's happening.
Yeah, for sure.
But so those are all the mechanics from original Ravnica, and I think most of them were like failures or mistakes in some way. I think that Forecast was bad. I think Transmute was sort of a mistake in that like repeatable tutoring mechanics are just like not very good.
Yeah.
I think that Convoke is difficult, but it is good. It's just a difficult mechanic to balance properly. I think Haunt was abysmal. I think that Dredge was a horrible mistake,
and Radiance
was meh. Was like totally meh. So, like, at least half, if not more, of the mechanics from original Ravnica are quite poor. Which I think says something again. I think that the original set was so beloved and so iconic, in spite of the fact that so many of the mechanics were like
sucked.
People loved Orzhov, but they were like, yeah, I don't like this Haunt card.
Yeah, but they still loved the guild and what it felt like, and the creatures in it that were outside of the mechanical aspects.
Yeah. So, if we move on a bit to Return to Ravnica...
Do you know how long it was a break before they returned to Ravnica? It's like 10 years, wasn't it?
It was something like that.
Close to 10 years.
Yeah. And it was just after they returned to Mirrodin, right?
Yeah.
Not immediately after, but like
Yeah, right around there.
Because it was like
2015, something like that.
Yeah, it went like Innistrad into Return to Ravnica, right?
Mm-hmm.
And before Innistrad was Scars of Mirrodin.
Yeah.
So this is like the second time we've ever returned to a plane that isn't Dominaria.
Mm-hmm.
And it's the most popular plane, probably bar none, maybe bar Dominaria.
Yeah.
Innistrad is now like a new darling at this stage of like Magic, but Ravnica's like probably the most popular individual setting they've ever created.
Sure.
Dominaria is a bit more complicated, I think, as a setting, because it's just a lot. There's just a lot more to it.
Yeah, and I don't think it's worth getting into now.
Sure.
People loved Ravnica. It'd been 10 years.
Yeah. But they come back. Some stuff comes back in Return to Ravnica. Hybrid Mana's back.
Yep.
Split cards are back.
Good old Death Rat Shaman.
Got that card. But yeah, split cards are back
With Fuse.
Yeah, and they've got a new like spin on them. Now you can play both of them if you pay the cost of both. Which actually, now that I've played with Fuse cards for as long as I have, it feels weird to me when I play with an old split card and I can't fuse it.
Yeah, I know exactly what you mean, because that's just like they did that so well, they designed it well, and it just felt right.
Yeah.
So love Fuse cards. I really hope they come back.
I
think there's a good chance.
I wouldn't be surprised by split cards coming back, because they're a good thing to have in your multicolor set, because it lets you kind of save some space in your design file, and you're like, we need an Azorius spell and a Selesnya spell.
Yeah.
And we only have one slot. Hey, a split card.
I mean, they could do something different, just like they did with like Aftermath cards and stuff like that, where it's a split card, but different.
That's definitely true.
Where it has different restrictions or whatever, and play with that space. But frankly, I'd just be happy to have Fuse back. Fuse back was sick.
I wouldn't be surprised if I'm trying something different, but I think that split cards are a pretty good bet to come back, because I think, to me now, at this point, it feels like they are a part of Ravnica.
Yeah.
Having looked at all the cards. And I also just think that they fit very well in the kind of design file of a multicolor set. They let you,
sure.
Like, save a lot of time and space. And guild mages, alongside, like, obviously the guilds themselves, are the other big thing that I think came back.
Mm-hmm. So did they make a guild mage for every guild in original Ravnica?
Yes.
And they made another guild mage for every single guild in Return to Ravnica block?
Yes.
Okay, cool. And I always remember them as being very powerful. Especially when I started playing. Like, having something that had like two options of its abilities, and usually both of them were like relevant. Or one of them was very relevant and the other one was like sometimes relevant. It was like,
so I believe the newer ones are slightly less powerful than the older ones overall. At least that's my memory. Some of them are a bit more powerful, but some of them are less.
I seem to recall the green-white one being quite good, but I forgot. Mixed tokens.
I think the green-white one is very good.
Yeah.
I won't get into every single guild mage.
Yeah, for sure. But
yeah. Also, big weird build-aroundy cards come back. You have stuff like Search the City, which nobody really remembers, but exile the top 5 cards of your library, and then you had to cast cards with the same name as them.
Sure.
And then when you did that, for all of them, you got an extra turn.
There was also like Enter the Infinite, right?
Enter the Infinite was in the set.
Mm-hmm.
Biovisionary and Azor's Elocutors were in the set.
Good old alternate win position.
What was there was a weird Deadbridge Chant was in the set.
That was like one of the first cards that I really, really enjoyed playing with. I remember when I got my copy. So I started playing in Theros block, so right after Return to Ravnica block. And I remember being hyped about flipping Deadbridge Chant and Night Howler. Do you know that card?
Oh, that was the one that was it was one of the bestow creatures in Theros.
Yes.
And yeah, you needed to so it was a bestow creature in Theros. You had it had +1/+1 equal to the number of creatures in your graveyard.
Correct.
So it gave enchanted creature that.
Yeah, exactly. So you play Deadbridge Champ, flip a bunch of cards, and early Timmy Holt was very happy with the idea of like, I just paid for like a 4-mana 8/8. And this is sick.
Yeah.
And I still get to like get this grindy card advantage. And I was just like happy about this. So good memories.
But yeah, there's a bunch of like, again, I encourage you to look at the Return to Ravnica card list and see how many like just crazy big splashy like enchantments and instants and sorceries there are. I think that you'll be surprised by how many of that sort of stuff came from Return to Ravnica as well. There was also like a bit of stuff around like Defender matters. Which reminds me a little bit of the enchantments matter from the original block.
Yeah, I always think of Crash Through, where, like, I feel like that card has been reprinted so many times from Return to Ravnica, where it's like, creature with Defender can't block this turn, draw a card. And I'm like, who wants this? Like, who plays this card, and who plays the actual walls to turn this on?
Hey man, we just got that Bant Dragon. Arcades.
Arcades. Oh. Oh god, I really hope Defender Matters does not come back.
And there was also a few things that like punished monocolored rather than rewarding multicolored.
Wasn't there a couple of efficient removal spells and the like for like monocolored creatures?
I think so. There was also a falter, but only for monocolored creatures.
Mm-hmm.
And that was kind of to do with the guild list being a theme. But that theme wasn't received very well. People were kind of like, no, Ravnica's not about the people who aren't in guilds. I don't care about that. Like, it's about the people who are.
For sure. And then we got, like, the guild gates, obviously.
Yeah, so that's the major differences. The two major differences between the sets, in my opinion, are the structure by which you drafted them and the fixing that was within them.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's interesting to look at the two differences. So, the original Ravnica block, you had your structure was like... if you were drafting the full block, your guild, like... separation across sets was like 4-3-3,
mm-hmm.
which meant that you had this very deep but very complicated drafting environment where you were trying to like follow a path.
Every time you talk
guilds.
about this, I always have the memory of we relatively recently had one of our teammates leave. He was called Leandro, loved the guy, but he had to go back to Brazil at least for a bit, and we had a party. And Alex Riley had saved a bunch of Ravnica packs. So we fired an actual Ravnica draft, Ravnica block. And Nathaniel sits down and is like, let me tell you about paths.
Yeah,
and I was just
theory.
and I was just like, what is this nonsense? I was happy about the fact I won that draft, and I kind of threw caution to the wind a little bit with your drafting pattern, but I mean, go on.
So you didn't have to totally hew towards path theory, but the general idea was that you wanted to plan out your draft based on the first pack and end up in 3 colors depending on which guild you were in pack 1, mm-hmm. and then which kind of guild you ended up in pack 3 or in pack 2 even. Sorry. As a result, you didn't really ever get some of the later guilds getting drafted on their own. Like, nobody ever drafted a Simic deck.
Yep.
Because that was only in pack 3.
Mm-hmm.
And so you never really saw any reasons to be Simic by the time you were in pack 3. There were exceptions to some of this, but it meant that people had a fun time drafting like a Selesnya deck or a Boros deck or a Dimir deck or a Golgari deck in just Ravnica City of Guilds draft, but then there was never that kind of experience with an Azorius deck or a Rakdos deck or a Simic deck from Dissension.
Okay.
So, and like I say, it also was just quite complicated. You had to like know what you were getting into. You couldn't just go in blind and expect to succeed.
Yeah, you had to be relatively premeditated on how you approach the color combinations. Yeah. Unless you're a Luxac like me.
Sure. So, the Return to Ravnica, they changed it so that the structure was 5-5-10 of guild separation, and you drafted each set individually.
Right.
So you would draft, like, Return to Ravnica.
Triple Return, triple Gate Crash,
triple Dragon's Maze.
Okay. I seem to recall Dragon's Maze being a terrible set.
It was not well received at all.
All the packs piling up in the LGS.
Yeah. It didn't help that it wasn't a very strong set. You had, like, Voice of Resurgence and not very much else.
Yeah.
But also the draft environment was very strange. So I think that the 5-5 drafting was quite successful. Mm. It meant that each of the guilds got to be drafted on their own. So the people who were like, I really want to draft a Simic deck, that's really cool, weren't told by, like, well, you can't.
Yeah.
Like, that's just not going to happen. You can't sit down at a draft of this block and expect to draft Simic. Whereas you could, if you're like, oh, I want to draft Simic. And I'm like, okay, cool. Well, I don't actually remember which one was in which, but, like, that was in Gate Crash.
Yeah.
Like, cool, you get to draft a cool Simic deck now. But the problem came in Dragon's Maze because, like, 10 guilds was just too many. It's just so much.
And they each had, like, a legend as well, right?
They each had a legend, but, like, just in general, for drafting limited, it's just so much to take in, and it's so hard to read signals.
Yeah.
In a massively multicolored environment.
Mm-hmm.
Just in general, like, Dragon's Maze added a bunch of really complex stuff to your limited environment. And it just became too much for people to keep track of. If you open up a sealed pool of Dragon's Maze, and you're like, okay, there are 10 guilds with multicolored cards for all of them, it was just very difficult for newer players, especially, to, like, really wrap their head around how to draft this properly.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, so I think that each of them had their own successes and their own kind of failures and the structures of how you drafted them. And then it was really interesting for me to look at the difference in the fixing, where original Ravnica had bounce lands and signets.
Yeah. Bounce
lands which have sort of broken into constructed, but only in a very specific environment.
Like Amulet Bloom.
Only Amulet Bloom. And I guess there's sometimes some crazy person who plays them in their, like, control deck.
Yep. It's card advantage.
It is card advantage. They were really cool.
Yeah.
And the signets were hugely impactful for constructed.
Yeah.
Like, majorly.
And majorly impactful for cube.
That's also true. They're really good in cube.
Yeah.
Like, it's kind of hard to overstate how good they are, really, because they are a colorless rampant growth.
Yeah.
And
sure.
Giving access to, like, a blue-white control deck to be able to play rampant growth is, like...
nuts.
Yeah.
As opposed to the key runes, right? Which were in Return to Ravnica, which were basically the same thing, but 3 mana to tap for either color. You didn't have the filter quality to them. And then you could also sack them to draw a card if you paid both the colors.
That was the Clue Stones.
Clue
The Clue Stones drew cards. The key runes became, like, animated into creatures.
Ah, right.
But
they both tapped for mana, though, right?
They both tapped for mana.
Yeah, and they're both 3 mana.
Yes. And then you also had Guild Gates instead of Bounce Lands, which are slightly weaker.
Yeah, I mean, definitely weaker. But you had certain synergies. I like that in
there
Gate
was
Crash.
Some, like, Gate Matters.
Yeah, exactly. And then, of course, you had the actual Dragon's Maze card.
Yes.
Oh, always...
Maze's End.
Maze's End, yeah.
I wouldn't be surprised to see Guild Gates come back.
Yeah.
I would be surprised to see Bounce Lands come back, because I think that they're actually pushing the power level that they would be looking for at, like, common or uncommon fixing, personally. Because I think that they have, like, a shot at being in standard control decks. For example.
I was about to say, I think they actually would see standard play.
Especially with stuff like Teferi in the format. Being able to, like, play Teferi and untap your Azorius Chancery and your island is like... Oh.
Please, Wizards, give us the justice we need in this world.
It would give a reason for Damping Sphere to be in standard.
Damping Sphere?
Yeah. 2 mana artifact from Dominaria.
Right. The anti-storm card.
Yeah, the anti-storm card and the anti-tron card.
I thought it was Dampening Sphere.
I think it's Damping Sphere, but... Okay.
Either way.
It does nothing. But
the anti-storm card.
It would give them a reason for that to be in standard.
And Alpine Moon?
That's true as well.
Oh my gosh, it's happening. Bounce Lands are coming back to standard.
Maybe. I would be so excited for Bounce Lands to come back, but I'm very doubtful of them coming back. I would expect them to just be like, cool, Guild Gates are back, because they fit neatly.
But everyone despises Guild Gates. How many times have you played, like, a tapped Cycle Land or something and be like, ugh, play Rakdos Guild Gate.
Cycle Lands rarely. The Shadowlands very commonly.
Yeah. And you're just, like, derisively calling it a Guild Gate.
To be fair, they aren't there for Constructed. Nobody is playing Guild Gates in Constructed except the one Turbo Fog Maze's End Madman. The people who are playing Guild Gates... Nobody's playing those in Constructed. The people are playing the rare duels in Constructed, which we'll get to in a moment. I just want to briefly touch on the newer mechanics. I don't want to go through them in as much detail as the original mechanics. Because I think most of them are a bit better.
Well, most of them are in, like... It feels weird to say this, but, like, living memory. Like, it wasn't that long ago. It was, like, 4 years ago or something we went back
I think it was, like, 6.
Was it that long ago?
Yeah.
Have I been playing Magic for that long? Weird.
I think so. I mean, I could be wrong. I could double check that, but I'm not gonna.
I think it was, like, 2014, but...
I think it was a little bit earlier than that. But either way, Also, but like you say, so most of them were like reasonably successful. Azorius had Detain, which fit them a lot better than Forecast and was a lot more like interactable. Its only major thing, so Detain was like generally like target non-land permanent, can't activate its abilities or attack or block until your next turn.
I think the only thing was like memory issues with it.
Had a few memory issues. It's also just not a very exciting mechanic, in my opinion.
I liked it a lot, but that's me. I thought it was like fun for tempo, and there's archetypes you could work with that. And
It's not like that's not. I will agree that it's like it's kind of it's okay to play. It's just like it always does the thing it does. It's hard to find new interesting things to do with Detain because it's just like yep,
Detain it.
Yeah, it's like tapping it but slightly better.
Yeah.
Dimir had Cypher, which was super weird. Basically, they made it. Realized that there's only so many things you can do with it, and also that if you make it good, it's absurd, and then just made a bunch of really bad cards with Cypher on them.
I can't even remember what Cypher does. There's this weird... You could... So, it would be an instant or sorcery, do a thing, and then you could Cypher it to a creature, and whenever it dealt damage to the opponent, cast the card again?
Yes.
Sick.
So, you kind of had this problem where you were like, oh, we don't really want to make a really powerful spell with this, because it snowballs really hard.
Yeah.
And, like, if it's good on its own and you get the Cypher bonus, it becomes, like, really obscene.
Yeah.
But also, these are really bad. And also, like, it has to be something in blue and black. It has to be something that you want to be able to do repeatedly.
It should just be Psionic Blast.
But, like, let's say you had Cypher, like, destroy target creature, Cypher onto a creature. It's like, that's obscene. You ever beat that in Limited? They kill your best creature, they attack with their good creature, and you're like, I guess block.
I mean, what would you cost that at? It'd have to be like 6 mana.
Yeah, it would have to be more. I think it would have to be like 7. Yeah, 7 or 8 mana. Like, that's obscene.
Fair enough.
Like, that effect is absurd and limited. And if you cost it at all reasonably toward, like, if you want to push it for constructed, it's like, oh, okay, this card breaks limited in half, and it's potentially really insanely constructed, or it just misses anyway because constructed has too much efficient removal.
Okay, for sure. The next mechanic
was Unleash from Rakdos.
Oh, I love this mechanic. It's so good.
I think it's not that good. I think it's fine.
I think it's fun because, like, yeah, okay, there aren't too many knobs. So Unleash X is like when this creature enters the battlefield, you can put X +1/+1 counters.
I don't think there's an X. I think it's just
Is it just Unleash? It's just 1/+1/+1. Okay, so if you unleash the creature, it gets a +1/+1 counter, but then it can't block.
Yeah.
So you have to make this cool, like, I like it because, like, yeah, well, it's either A or B, which is a bit boring, but
that's actually not my problem.
I actually found the way that it played was just like, oh, I need to think about what this game is about. Like, it tests, like, sometimes you get very, very rewarded with Unleash, where you say, like, actually, I'm the beatdown, and I'm doing it.
So
that way, like unlimited and stuff.
My impression of Unleash is that actually it's kind of a false choice, and that the majority of the time you should just be putting the counter on your dude.
Yeah, that's fair.
Like there was one where there was a choice to that, which was the Death Touch one.
Yeah.
Because Death Touch is so much more valuable on a defensive creature, but so much more of the time it's like I can either have a bad creature that I could block with, or a creature that will force my opponent onto the defensive that I can't block with.
Yeah, that's fair.
I think that Unleash was interesting-ish, but reads more interesting than it plays. Like, you read it and you're like, oh, a fun choice. And you play it and you're like, oh, I should just put the counters on it every time.
For sure.
I would prefer them to bring back Hellbent.
Yeah, I actually think I would prefer Hellbent over Unleash. What's the next mechanic?
Blood Rush from the Gruul.
I hate this mechanic. I despise this mechanic. I have lost so many games when I started playing Magic to this stupid mechanic. I hate Gore-Clan Rampager.
I think that Blood Rush is an interesting mechanic that personally I believe has some developmental concerns. Where it's hard to have that much instant speed pump in your set. Normally pump spells have the kind of problem that, you know, they're not a creature.
Yeah.
And you need a creature for them to be good.
this is the thing. They're always modal spells.
Yeah.
Like, it's so strong. That's why I hate Blood Rush. Like, the amount of times that, like, you just have a creature that you're going to play on, like, 4 or 5 or whatever, and your opponent's like, okay, like, thinks, looks, realizes it'd be better if you had a trick, and was like, no blocks. And you're like, look at my 2 creatures in hand. Blood Rush this one, Blood Rush this one. I just dealt 10 to you. You're dead. And you're like...
That's the kind of thing where Blood Rush generally doesn't... Like, the fail case is very low for the person playing the Blood Rush card. Because either your opponent blocks, you play your Blood Rush card, and you kill that creature. Your opponent doesn't block, and either you kill them with the Blood Rush pump, or you just hit them for damage.
And then you play your creature.
And then you play the Blood Rush creature.
You continue playing the game. And
yeah. So, yeah, putting pump spells... It does require you to be aggressive, because it's only attacking creatures.
Yes.
But putting pump spells on creatures in that way, I think has some slight developmental concerns for limited.
Can't even counter it. It's an ability. Like, fine, I can kill your creatures, but...
I think it's fun to play with, but it means you have to be, like, really careful about putting pump spells... It takes up all your pump spell real estate with quite good ones.
Yeah, exactly. I kind of hope they don't. If they do bring Blood Rush back, I hope it's in a smaller amount with something else, or like it's a small part. Like I would like it if they had like 1 or 2 cards that basically had Blood Rush, but that wasn't the keyword.
Sure, yeah, it was a callback rather than being the return of the mechanic.
Exactly.
Selesnya had Populate, which is a fun mechanic with a couple of issues. Mm-hmm. Populate is... Generally, it goes on spells, and it's like... Spell does something, populate. When you populate, you choose a creature token you control and put a copy of that creature token into play.
Yeah.
So...
You're 5/5 worm, usually.
Yeah. Well, so Populate has this thing where it wants you to have a lot of tokens, and it's quite hard a lot of the time to make a deck that wants to populate that isn't dedicated to populating.
Yeah, I get what you mean. Like, I think there's a couple of cards... Like, a card... It's tough, because, like, populate has to be, like, some text that's tacked on onto, like, an already good card for a card to, like, be playable outside of that deck.
Yeah.
Whereas, like, so a card I really, really like from the set, Rootborn Defenses, I think is just, like, this is a cool populate card, but it's only a populate card. It's literally a go wide tokens, like, okay, make all my creatures indestructible and make another one.
Yeah.
Great. That's only good in the go wide tokens deck.
Yeah.
So I'm happy with this card, but
it's hard to make populate cards that are desirable to anyone who isn't in the tokens deck, because the upside of them in the tokens deck, especially if you make like a 5/5 token in your set, is absurd. You get to be like, oh, okay, cool. All right, yeah. Like, now my Disenchant comes with a 5/5 attached for 2 mana.
Which is pretty sick.
Yeah. But then the fail case is so low, they just have a lot of swing to them. Mm. And it also has this, like, weird problem, which you don't really think about that much, but you kind of realize in play is, like, you need so many tokens.
Yeah.
And to make populate interesting, you need so many different tokens.
Yeah.
And for most players, when it's like, oh, okay, so I have this 3/3 Rhino, and this 1/1 Bird, and this 1/1 Saproling, and this 5/5 Worm, and it's like, what's representing those? Mostly, like, empty sleeves, or, like, coins.
The back of cards, or cards from your sideboard, or something daft.
Like, people don't tend to have tokens, really. Like, some people do, especially if they're playing more token-focused decks in Constructed, but in Limited, you don't tend to bring all your tokens with you, and especially at a kitchen table, people don't tend to have tokens.
Yep.
So it's this kind of weird thing where R&D are like, do we want to push 1 million tokens into our set? It kind of makes things hard.
I mean, I love token strategies, though. I really hope they have it. And I enjoyed Populate, but I understand what you're saying.
Especially with Convoke. Like, we know Populate probably won't come back because it's a Selesnya mechanic, and we know the Selesnya mechanic is going to be Convoke. But, so it's unlikely to come back, but I wouldn't be surprised by tokens.
Yay.
Because that's still definitely a part of the Selesnya...
Sprout Swarm. Let's go.
Not that one. That is, but I think tokens are definitely a part of the kind of Selesnya, like, identity.
Yeah.
Simic had Evolve.
So Evolve was if you played a creature that had more power or toughness than it, put a +1/+1 counter on this creature. Is that right?
Yes.
I hate this mechanic.
Why?
I despise it.
I think this one's quite good.
It's boring. Play big creatures. I'm already in for that. There's not very many knobs for it.
There's definitely some interesting evolved cards.
I think there's some cards that are rewarding where it's like, I'm gonna play this 0/1 flyer. And you're like, okay, I'm gonna play a 2/2 and a 3/3 and whatever, and it's like, yes, get stronger.
I think
That's
Evolve is
cool.
interesting. It doesn't just encourage you to play big creatures, it commonly encourages you to play your creatures or to sequence them in a certain way such that like you keep getting evolve triggers.
That's true.
And there's a couple of like Fathoms something. Maybe it's not called that. There's like a 2 blue-green 1/1 that's like with evolve, and whenever a +1/+1 counter gets put on it, draw a card.
I mean, that's just a good card though. That's a good card because you want to draw cards, but I feel like...
But I think it's interesting in that
it doesn't essentially... It's not like Helium Squirter, where like it changes the play pattern, and you're like, I want to do different things, and I want to think about this.
I will agree that I think that Graft is a more interesting mechanic, but I think that Evolve is a relatively successful Simic mechanic, because Simic is like kind of this weird crossroads where it's like, how do you mix blue and green?
Yeah.
It's like, oh, you want to make things big, but you kind of want to do it in a weird and slightly tricky way, and like...
Yeah.
I think Evolve succeeds at being a good Simic mechanic. And I think it plays relatively well in Limited, in that you feel rewarded for building your deck in the right way.
I think it's good. I think it's simple. I think it's grokkable. I just don't find it very interesting. And if they do bring it back, I wouldn't be surprised if they brought it back. Because like you said, like I think a lot of people enjoyed it. Yeah. But I wouldn't be that excited. Sure. I'd be like...
I would be very interested by Proliferate as the Simic mechanic.
Yes! That would be so great. So much better than Evolve.
I think it's something they've talked about bringing back for a little while now. We definitely have heard them talk about bringing it back for Kaladesh. But then they kind of realized... Well, it just didn't fit in the set, basically. But I think with energy counters leaving standard, bringing back Proliferate would be a good time now. Because it lets you, like, not have a bunch of unexpected nonsense happen, basically.
And with -1/-1 counters leaving.
Yeah, that's also true.
Since they'll be going with Amonkhet, like, you don't have to worry about Proliferate, like, killing creatures. Just, like, making creatures bigger or changing them somehow.
Having like, less things that your Proliferate cards are going to do allows you to balance them a bit more easily. It does make them slightly less interesting, but you can introduce more interesting things later. Like, maybe the third Ravnica set has -1/-1 counters in it because it's a bolus set.
Oh, that's sick.
And, like, then maybe Proliferate takes on this new meaning, but you've had, like, 2 sets where people are getting used to playing it with just, like, positive effects.
Yeah, okay.
I think it would be a good time to bring it back now, personally. But we'll see what they do. Also had Extort.
Extort, when a creature ETBs with this... That was white or something like that. No. I'm trying to think. It's when a creature ETBs or when you cast a spell, you could pay the extort cost, and then your opponent loses a life, you gain a life.
The last part is right. The first bit's a bit shaky. Whenever you cast a spell,
right?
If you have a permanent with extort, you may pay white or black, so like hybrid white-black, and drain your opponent for 1. You gain 1.
Right. Okay.
And you could do this like multiple instances of extort stacked. So if you had like 2 creatures with extort, you could pay 2 mana to drain them twice.
I think I was getting confused with Blind Obedience, which is
creatures ETB tapped for your opponents.
And you have extort,
yes.
and it has extort, so it could be on an enchantment as well.
It could be on any permanent. Extort was really fitting for Orzhov. It really captures the idea of this kind of like the debt collecting guild that slowly drains you out, and it also fit Black-White quite well. Black-White often cares about small instances of life gain. I don't think it was a particularly, outside of being very good at capturing Orzhov, I don't think it was a particularly exciting mechanic in terms of gameplay.
Yeah, I mean, like, it was kind of cool just to have, like, basically, you have cards that let you...
Like, spend your mana more efficiently.
Yeah, it's a weird mana
kicker.
sink. Yeah. Which is cool, but again, it's not particularly exciting. I would like them to innovate more in the Orzhov space. They have the flavor there.
To be fair,
I want something with ghosts.
I will argue that Orzhov has the highest delta between how bad their first mechanic was and how much better their second mechanic was.
I agree. I agree with
I
that.
think
Extort is
the
like...
Golgari are the only people who give them a run for their money.
Yeah.
Izzet had Overload, which was a very solid mechanic.
So Overload says you can pay you can cast a spell for the Overload cost, and then it targets everything it can target. Is that right?
So it replaces all instances of the word target in the spell's text with each.
Each.
Yeah.
Ooh, okay.
And all of the Overload spells were like, return target permanent you don't control to its owner's hand, overload it, each permanent you don't control. Just deal 4 damage to target creature you don't control, deal 4 damage to... deal 4 damage to target creature you don't control, deal 4 damage to each creature you don't control.
Elysium Mortars.
Yeah.
Like was it Counterflux? Was that the one
that was the counter spell?
That you could pay... It had Overload as well, where you just countered every spell.
Every spell you didn't control, yeah.
So weird. I hated that card. It's gotten me once or twice playing Storm, and I've been like, what? In Modern?
Oh yeah,
really?
I played Ad Nauseam at one point and got caught by Counterflux. I went off during my whole deck, put the Lightning Storm on the sack, and my opponent was like, Counterflux it? And I was like, oh, that can't be countered? Okay, cool.
Yeah.
But yeah, Overload was a pretty successful mechanic. Like I say, I think Izzet is one of the only guilds that just had really good mechanics every time. And it broke through into Constructed, and it was also good in Limited. People enjoyed playing with it because people like having modal spells where you get to do something big and exciting with the second mode.
I feel like they did really well with the Spells Matter and the Izzet thing, so I pretty much have no worries about that. I think I'd like to see a new mechanic, but just because it's new, I think the other ones were great already. I'd be happy with either of them to come back.
Yeah.
Actually, what I want most is bring back Weed Dragonauts.
That card was so good.
So good.
I feel like it's been outclassed in its day. I feel like Enigma Drake is a more powerful... It's a kind of different...
Or Mercurial Geist.
Oh, that card was sick.
Yeah, but...
Those sorts of cards are a lot of fun to play, to build the right limited deck for.
And I feel like the Izzet guild always had the proper, basically, frame for you to do that.
Yeah, I agree. The Golgari had Scavenge.
You could... I'm not sure what this one does. I think it's something like you can pay a cost when it's in a graveyard, and then you can add its power and toughness to a creature?
That is almost exactly right.
Nice.
A creature with Scavenge has a Scavenge cost. You can pay the Scavenge cost to exile that creature from your graveyard and put +1/+1 counters equal to its power and toughness, or equal to maybe just its power. I don't remember exactly, but put +1/+1 counters onto a creature you control.
For sure.
This was a pretty good mechanic, and definitely less developmentally problematic than Dredge.
Well done.
Well done, R&D. You didn't make a second Dredge.
I think it did suffer a little bit from being one of these onboard trick sort of...
Kind of. I mean, it wasn't a trick because it was only sorcery speed, I believe.
Yeah, well, this is what I mean, though.
Yeah.
It's it was just a thing that was there, and you could choose to do it or not, and it was fine.
Yeah. It definitely...
I'd like more things that cared about stuff being in your graveyard from Golgari this time around. Stuff like what I was talking about with Night Howler, where there's more creatures that care about how many creatures you have in your graveyard.
Sure, yeah.
Or do you have enchantments or this or that in your graveyard? I'm interested in that. That's sick. Or when you put cards into your graveyard, you can I don't know, maybe you drain someone or something like this.
Yeah, okay. Seeing something from a Golgari, another Graveyard Matters thing that's a bit more about what's actually in your graveyard rather than taking stuff out of your graveyard.
Yeah.
Could be interesting. And then finally, Boros had Battalion, which definitely fit them better.
And was sick. Sick mechanic for sick people. When you attack with 3 creatures or more, Battalion triggers, and some effect will happen.
Yeah, something happens. Frontline Medic makes your creatures indestructible. I'm fairly certain there's something that means that Legion Loyalist makes it so that creature tokens can't block, and your creatures gain trample on first strike.
Yep.
Just in general, there's kind of stuff you can do with Battalion, because all it needs to be is something that you want to be doing while you're attacking. But there's a ton of effects like that, and it kind of plays relatively well because often you're like, oh, do I want to attack with 3 creatures? And you're like, yeah, but I'm getting this cool bonus.
Yeah.
It encourages games to end. Yep. Limited and breaks board stalls, which I'm generally a fan of.
It feels very Boros as well.
Yeah, it is.
Boros beats.
Yeah, it captures the essence of Boros way better than Radiance ever did.
Yes, absolutely. And if they brought back Battalion, I'd be excited about it.
I would too. I think Battalion would be an excellent choice to bring back. But I would also be interested if they could do like another good Boris mechanic.
I wish they would just bring back Lightning Helix, really. That's the card I want in my limited format.
That card would be really cool to have access to in standards. But maybe too good.
Yeah, probably. But amazing.
Yeah. I mean, so this is the thing I think that'll be most impactful on standard that we can expect from Ravnica will be the shock lands if they return.
Mm-hmm.
Which, like I say, I think we should expect them to, because I think they're a part of Ravnica at this point.
Yeah.
The only reason to not get them would be Wizards trying to do something a bit weird and different, but I don't think they will. But if they do, I would still expect them to release a set of dual lands that have basic land types, because we just had a set of dual lands, or about to have a set of dual lands with basic land types leave, and they interact specifically well with the check lands, right? Which are our dual lands that are staying.
Yes.
So you kind of want...
Basic land time. Sure.
I think there's lots of reasons for it, though. It's like... So the shocklands fit every bill of what you're looking for from jewels right now really well. So you generally... Okay, so they put jewels at the rare slot because they want to make them... They want to sell packs, basically, because they're aware that people need them for their constructed decks.
Mm-hmm.
They've said that this is why they do this. And that's fine. If they're going to do that, they're going to do that. So... You put your rare lands at the rare slot. So what this is going to do is it's going to disappoint some number of your more casual audience who open up a land and are like, "Oh, I don't understand why this is good."
Yeah.
There are lots of newer players who don't really get why a rare land would be exciting, so they aren't excited by it. Shock lands kind of get around that problem because they're worth money.
Yay!
So people are like, "Oh, I know that this land is good because I've heard people talk about it," and or like, "Oh, I look it up and oh man, this is worth like $10.
Mm-hmm.
That's awesome. I don't care about like not opening this cool dragon because I can sell this and buy 4.
Sick. Everyone needs more Shivan dragons.
Yeah. So it kind of solves that problem, and it also obviously like you also make you make multiple format players happy because they're like, "Oh, cool, I can pick up more shocklands." Yeah, I didn't have a full set of Godless Shrines before, but now's a good time to pick them up.
Yep.
And you cater to a specific audience that they want to do so, of like the medium level player who isn't that enfranchised, who doesn't like look up decks online or whatever, but plays with their friends and is building their own decks and is like playing relatively frequently every week.
Mm-hmm.
And you release a shockland. This person, let's say they started playing an Ixalan, okay? And they got pretty into the game and they like building their own decks and finding synergies. And they open up a shockland. It's like, "Oh, this is a Blood Crypt. That's cool. Oh, wait. Oh, this is a swamp and a mountain? Huh. I've been playing this, like, white-black deck. And it plays all these isolated chapels.
Yep.
Oh, these interact.
Mm-hmm.
And they get to have a level-up moment where they figure out the synergy.
Yeah. I think there's also something special for that player as well, of being like, once they figured that out, realizing how these are used in other places.
Yeah.
And as a stepping stone to be like, oh... Maybe I should start playing Modern.
Yeah.
Maybe I should explore that. Maybe I can make a deck there.
Yeah, it gives... Like, the shocklands are just a very good cards at doing a lot of things that I think you want to do with your Ravnica set.
Okay.
So I would be very surprised to not see them show up.
So, aside from the shocklands, which I think pretty much everyone wants, what do you want to see from the new set? Are you excited about it?
I am...
We've talked a lot, obviously, about the old sets, but how are you feeling about the new one?
I'm really excited about the new Ravnica set. I still don't really know what to expect fully. Like I say, I've been through all of the old Ravnica stuff, and I expect some hybrid mana cards to show up.
Okay.
I expect split cards to show up, and I expect a cycle of guild mages, and I expect a lot of gold cards. Which is personally exciting to me because I have a cube of entirely gold cards. And so... Any multicolor set is an exciting time for me because the spoiler season is going to be me going, "Oh my god, so many cards for my cube." But that aside, I also enjoy multicolor constructed environments. Mm-hmm. That's another reason why you should have shocklands in your Ravnica set, is because if you make a mana base that's too weak, what is the nightmare? Okay, what is the nightmare scenario for R&D at Proto Guilds of Ravnica?
There's no Guilds of Ravnica cards.
Sort of like that. I think the nightmare scenario is the best decks are mono green, mono red, and mono black.
Yeah, that's what I mean though.
Yeah.
Like that's pretty much it. It's like they'll have one or two of these new cards, but overall it's just like oh, these are the same decks from before, or like it's just using all the Dominaria cards that rewarded monocolor and
and the one of the big reasons why that could happen is if you print like a really weak set of dual lands or whatever, and people are like, it's not actually worth it to play 2 colors.
Yeah, I may as well just sleeve up my Chain Whirlers. Let's go. And still leave champions.
Yeah, I mean, so that's quite unlikely because small standard environments are quite difficult to make monocolor decks in, generally, because it's just you don't have a depth of the card pool to play in.
I'm excited for small standard.
Me too. That's another major thing I'm excited about. But it's hard to make monocolor decks in a small standard environment. But you also, I think another nightmare scenario, but a lesser one, is everyone's playing Dimir or Izzet or Selesnya or whatever. Everyone's playing like guild decks, but they're kind of bad.
Yeah.
Because the mana's really bad.
Yeah.
And your deck's like just kind of like, you just have this failure rate where you're like, like
the cards are powerful, but I'm flipping a coin about whether I'm going to get mana screwed or not, and this sucks.
And so like people play them, but there's also people playing mono green and kind of beating them. Mm-hmm. And sometimes the mono green player will lose because they're like not as powerful. The cards aren't as powerful, but like they'll win some of the time just because like their Selesnya opponent stumbles on mana and doesn't get there.
For sure.
So I think there's lots of good reasons to put Shocklands into your Ravnica set. Because you know Shocks plus Checks is a powerful mana base that will let people play your guilds.
Yeah, and might even allow for some 3-color decks.
Absolutely. Yeah. It lets people be like, oh, well, I'm a control deck, so I can kind of be 3 colors.
Yeah.
Because, like, I'm going to splash white for Teferi and be like a red-blue control deck.
Yeah.
Something like that.
I hope for this set to get a few reprints.
Dark Confidant.
No, we're not doing that again. I would like Precinct Captain back.
Such a Holt ass.
I would like... I already said Lightning Helix. I'd like an Aurelia of some variety. That'd be great. I'd like a big Flying Angel.
I would expect Legendary Guild leaders.
Yeah, I actually, weirdly enough, so I never really played that much with the cards from the set and didn't care about it this much. But I actually would, from a lore point of view, I'd really like a new Lavinia. Because Lavinia is now like kind of Jace's right hand or whatever.
Sure, yeah.
And she's kind of become a bigger character in the story. And I remember making an EDH deck with her a very long time ago when I first started playing. Back when I actually played EDH. And so I'd like to see a new Lavinia, see how she's grown.
I want to see a third incarnation of Borborygmos. But with a slightly more confusing name this time.
Okay, like what would you like?
Borborygmos, enraged and ready to party.
And ready to party?
Yeah, I just want them to keep releasing Borborygmi, but with a new addition to the name.
I think you should just do like... Then it would be like Borborygmos Enraged, and then Borborygmos Enraged Leader.
Yeah.
And then it'll be like... Borborygmos, enraged leader of the Gruul.
Yeah,
or
exactly.
something like that.
I just want it to be as hard as possible when you play Pithing Needle and are trying to name Borborygmos Enraged for anyone to know what's happening.
That's a terrible wish. And I think you might be a terrible person.
I mean, I don't really wish it to happen, but I would be very entertained if they did spoil, like, Borborygmos, even more angry. And I was like, man, he's been around a while. This dude is hanging on.
He's so raging.
He's so angry. I am generally excited for the new Ravnica set. I'm also excited for them to not have to do a third one that is especially Ravnica based.
Yeah.
And for them to just be like, alright, the guilds are going to be around, but it's going to be based around Bolas. That's the thing.
I think, so, talking from the things I'm not that excited about, I do feel like it's a little bit soon to go back to Ravnica, frankly. We've had a couple of return sets recently. I know we just had Ixalan and Amonkhet as well, but obviously this is the first plane we're returning to for a third time, and it feels a bit soon to me. So I was kind of hoping it would be a little bit longer before we went back to Ravnica. But the other thing that I was going to bring up is that we're going to be in Ravnica for such a long time. I'm really happy we're doing this and kind of looking back to the past and things to look forward to and speculating on that, because I've been kind of tempering myself a little bit so that I don't get like too hype and too invested and like, all right, let's look forward to Ravnica and whatever. Because it's like, don't worry, dude. There's going to be a lot of Ravnica.
Yeah. Oh, you like Ravnica?
You
buddy.
got a whole year of Ravnica coming
Yeah.
up. And it's like, oh my... Okay. Hopefully it's going to be fine.
Yeah. Like I say, I think that hopefully with the third set being not as much a Ravnica set as much as a like... I mean, I'm pretty certain it's going to be like a Bolus Invades Ravnica set.
That's cool.
Which, like, that's a different theme and twist on it.
Do you think we'll get more afflict people?
Oh, I'd forgotten about Afflict. Maybe, if they decided that's associated with the Eternals. I'd prefer them to bring back Eternalize. That was a good mechanic.
Yeah.
Like,
And
mechanic
I don't feel like it was explored a ton either.
No, it was, like, fun and limited, and like surprisingly strong and constructed, but not in an overpowering way.
Yeah.
It was like, oh, Earthshaker Kenner is a pretty cool card, and then it gives me a late game mana sink, and Champion of Wits is a pretty cool card, and it lets me like take over a game later.
Yeah.
It's like, this card is fun to play, and I feel rewarded for playing it, but it's not like no one was being like, turn 3 Champion of Wits, the game is over.
Yeah, for sure. As opposed to Adorned Pouncer. Turn 2
God.
Adorned Pouncer. Oh, get wrecked.
Game is so over. You can hit me for 2. It's like you played a Grizzly Bear.
Oh, it's so strong.
Yeah, okay, so for viewers who don't want to bother to look it up, Return to Ravnica was in 2012. So it has been 6 years since we went to Ravnica. I will say that is a shorter time between original Ravnica and Return to Ravnica. At least I believe so, because I believe original Ravnica was like 2002.
Yeah.
So Return to Ravnica, Return to Ravnica, followed by Return to Ravnica, followed by Return to Ravnica, has come sooner.
Yes.
Than original Return to Ravnica.
And it feels a little bit soon for me. That's it.
I mean, people were saying that about Innistrad, I think.
Yeah.
When we went back to Shadows.
I'd kind of just like a couple new planes, or to hang out actually on Dominaria for a while. I would
That's
like
fair.
that a little bit
Dominaria
better.
was a really good set, so it's kind of hard to say goodbye to Dominaria so soon.
I think the other thing as well is, like you were saying before, like from a universe perspective, like Dominaria is just really big.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of people to explore and catch up with, and I would have liked to spend some more time there. But that's cool. We can go back to the city land and Jace being a...
I mean, I think basically that they didn't know how successful Dominaria would be. So when they were making it, they were clearly like, we have to have something that's like a surefire hit after this. Because if this bombs, like, we need to recover strong.
Magic is dead. Do you think
Well,
they were
I don't
singing...
think that's the case,
You
but I
think
think
they were
they were
singing
like-
in the R&D office like, if this fails...
I think they want to follow up a risky block with a surefire block.
Yeah, for sure.
And it ended up being that Dominaria was great, so everyone's like, well, why aren't we singing Dominaria longer? And I'm sure that in their offices they were like, because can you imagine making the call of like, yeah, we're returning to Dominaria, a place we haven't been for the past like 15 years.
Yeah.
Maybe longer, actually.
Mm-hmm.
And, yeah, we're not... And we're going to stay there for 3 sets. It's like, okay, what if the first one doesn't go well? Then I guess we're screwed.
You're gonna have to deal with it, Magic players.
So I definitely understand why we haven't gone back to Dominaria immediately, but I do think it would be fun to have a few more sets there in the future.
Well, I'm looking forward to it. I'm cautiously optimistic.
I am always excited about rotation because it means that the formats change majorly. And I'm going to continue to be excited about this one because I really like multicolor sets and I like good mana bases. And I suspect that Ravnica will have both. Plus, Izzet's in the first set, so, you know, the good guild's there.
Yeah, hopefully I would like it they print like a 1-mana Goblin Electromancer. That'd be sick. Just hybrid, blue-red.
So unreasonable.
It'd be great.
Okay. All right. I think we're going to wrap it up there. Thank you guys so much for listening. This one has been a bit on the long side, but I hope you appreciate it. It was kind of a very special episode, I guess, about a bit more of a specific topic.
Think of it as payback for the ones
Yeah.
we weren't able to do earlier in the month.
Thank you guys so much. If you want to check out our sponsor, Murphy's Vault, you can find them on murphysvault.com. They sell singles. and also tickets to their events. If you want to meet the people behind Murphy's Vault, then you can come on down. We're in Edinburgh. You can find us online. It's a great store run by some really great people, and spending time there is a lot of fun. So I encourage you to do so if you can. If you want to find us online, on Twitter, I am at F_Ironside. Dan, who is not here, but is normally a part of the podcast, is at Dan Zeru. And you can find Holt at
Cap'n Powerhouse. I was going to say that I think it's also worthwhile saying if you like the content we make, you should go ahead and check out on the Murphy's Vault website. We also do articles and the like as well that you can see. And if you want to get some insight into strategy, we do some videos as well. Brannick's been doing a lot of popper videos and things like that. So
there's tons of content on there. So if you like this, then make sure to check that out. If you like this also, make sure to share it with your friends who you would like to inflict magic talk on.
Yeah. I mean, that's the gift that keeps on giving.
Yeah, magic talk is great. Everyone loves magic talk.
You're really selling this.
I think it was fun. I think it was a fun episode. I hope people enjoyed it. We're gonna leave you guys now. Have a good rest of your time. We have been From the Vault, and you've been fantastic.